Yeah, totally. I am Michael Felker. I am an editor on the movie Something in the Dirt, which is a weird docu-narrative sci-fi horror about two people who find a strange anomaly phenomenon thing in one of their apartments and try to record a documentary about it and hopefully find fame and success through their findings. They brought me on very early on, like script phase. Like every movie that I've been with them since spring, they always send me the script and read, and they want my thoughts, and then they go from there. So they sent me. We're in the middle of the pandemic at this point, and they sent me the script like about a month or two before the shoot, and they were like, "Hey, we're gonna make this in like specific quarantine where it's just like those two plus the producer and good friend Dave Lawson are the only three crew members on set all the time, and they're shooting in Justin and Aaron's apartment. So they're like, we could love you offsite, like at my house here, and editing the movie. And yeah, they just brought me on very early on, and I was excited because the script was nothing like else that they've ever made before. It's so weird and left of center, and I was very excited to jump on board. Well, I mean, I guess in the name itself, it's like you're trying to edit a movie like you're approaching it as a regular narrative traditional movie and as a documentary. So it's a little bit of the good and bad that come with both, especially with documentary part, which is like, the most extensive writing that a documentary does is within the editing room. Actually, a lot of figuring out the story there. And thankfully we didn't have to do a lot of that because the script was pretty tight where it was. But with the documentary element, we were kind of no realm of possibility, no realm of like limitations or anything could stop us from trying out different assets or things we would find on the internet to sell a point for the characters to excel their threads in the documentary, in the movie. So it's like, I guess the short term would be it's like a narrative, but you're allowed to do so much more and do cool things with it. Justin wrote an incredible script that what you see there is what happens. Like they had to still do like the scenes properly and shoot them that way, but you know, the the first cut of the movie was 3 hours and 45 minutes long, which, in true conspiracy theorist form, that's just like a big rambling thread of a movie. So we had to find interesting things in rewriting or tweaking or reshaping in the edit to tell this kind of, rabbit hole of a movie where the runtime doesn't go too crazy too. So we had the script all laid out, but what we could do in the edit kind of expanded certain things that were already there to begin with. Well, I think with these guys specifically, because this is my fourth movie editing with them, they trust me a lot in terms of, creative input with the movie. So, we had a big Google sheet for like every scene. We were like, what if we use this asset or this image or this video to make this line pop? For example, there's a part of the movie where a character's talking about hunting a lobster, and on the Google sheet, we're like, I found this video of a lobster that would go great here. So, but they also left it open ended where they're just like Felker, if you want to go check out anything, like if you find anything, bring it back and we'll cut it in the movie. And so there's some freedom there with these guys that you wouldn't get with like a traditional director editor thing. Because I guess to the original question, like, the reason why I direct on this, like more and more on the side, is that I learn a lot about telling stories visually through editing. And, you know, I wouldn't say, with these guys, their vision is very clear in their heads, and I'm on the wavelength, but I'm not like in their heads. So I'm still like, trying to execute a vision and going from there. I wasn't terribly deep in the esoteric elements that Justin would write because Justin's just way more knowledgeable about that stuff. But I'm more of like a bullshit checker where it's just like, I know the movie pretty well, like those guys. I like probably know it outside of Dave, Aaron, Justin. I know the movie like the back of my hand. So I tell them if something's bouncing off me, and if I need to like put my foot down, being like, I don't think this is working. We do have a serious conversation and try stuff out. And you know, but that's not doesn't happen too often. Like I usually am just like, oh man, go even further with what they're going and adding more. It becomes like a yes and, especially with this movie, which yes anding leads to more mania and crazy demented thinking. So I would say like, as a second director, I'm definitely more of just like a second opinion to a movie I really care about. That's a good question because pacing is always a thing it's a thing that people talk about more when watching a movie about the editing than anything else. Like in my experience, people are like, they rarely use the word good editing or fast editing, or when they're like, they would say too slow, too fast. That they just know by feeling a movie. So like when I'm doing like other jobs, like, television editing or like digital editing, there's pretty much like specific rules in pacing, especially with like digital editing, where it's just like, don't have a 2-minute video drag, otherwise people are going to click off. Like that's the easy thing about that. So there's harder rules with that. But with indie film, you can actually say something in the art of the pacing. And just because you feel something is bad doesn't mean it's bad. Maybe it's done by intention. So like, like this movie is a movie that tests a lot of you going down rabbit holes. And I guess it goes to my point earlier, which is like, if you're not into this type of like manic like journey that these two boys are going through in these rabbit holes, then yeah, the movie's going to feel pretty long because it's like one of those things. But there are things within the narrative of this specifically that even justify the edit, like not to spoil anything, but post-production elements and people at play are actually factored into the story. And I feel like it would be disingenuous to have a tight 90 with this movie if we had a lot of post-production issues that happen in the narrative. Like it should start to feel lumpy. It should start to feel like off the rails at some point where you're like, where is this going? And that isn't like a negative, I guess I would say, for like execution, like, oh, we should have cut like 20 minutes up. He's like, no, that's saying something, and it should make you feel impatient and uneasy by design. And that's tough to articulate because I feel like editing should get an art form of nuance. Editing should get a benefit of nuance that a lot of parts of filmmaking get, like writing and directing. And I feel like editing is more like a craft of like, is it tight and am I bored? Especially with this, where the making of the movie is part of the whole feel and character of it. Like, yeah, because at certain points these boys are at least getting their hands in the edit and trying to make the movie work. So you'll feel it more than any other traditional narrative that their character has influenced the movie. So when things are like clicking with the movie, it's when the characters are like, oh, they're in sync with each other, they like these threads are going down, and it feels fun because the edit is like hypnotic and you're into it. But then as they start to pull apart and they start to like fight more, or they start going in different directions of what they think the doc should be, you feel not only the edit feel more erratic, but also you could feel, especially with John's character, who is like a dominating character over Levi, you feel his hand and you feel his choices influence the edit more than what Levi would have done. Like there's a scene that I think about a lot, and it's kind of hard to talk about without spoilers. So spoiler alert for that. But there's a scene where the two characters found a thread that led them to a graveyard. And while they're shooting each other with cameras as they're walking through the graveyard trying to find the next thread. Levi gives a theory about what he thinks is going on. And shortly thereafter, John shoots that theory down, being like, I don't think it works. In the edit, you could see that John or Levi, we don't cut to any assets with him because he's like giving all these threads, but we're not giving him like clear images or videos to support him, because at that point, John has taken over the edit and he would not put assets. He doesn't want to feed his theory because he doesn't agree with it. So when John interrupts and says, my theory is the one that we should be going down, we start seeing assets with him. And that is the kind of thing that influences the character, where you start to see that where assets are going is where the director of the movie is like thinking the movie's threads are going, which more and more lean towards John's POV. I'm always curious what people take away from it, because, you know, there's some people who would probably watch this movie and go like, I have no patience for a rabbit hole movie that's conspiracy driven. Like, I'm out. But like, there's some people who would want to follow the threads. And that was kind of important, I guess, was to like, if someone really wanted to dig into the narrative of this movie and the threads, every step is there. And it's great to pick up on, especially on a rewatch. But like, yeah, I mean, when we got and started getting the movie into finer shape, the edit is where we were like, well, what else can we talk about? What else can we expand upon? What are the options? Like certain things with like different assets we would pull. We would, you know, the art director on the movie, Katie Simon, did a lot of the illustration stuff that you would see on as an asset to draw pictures of. And that was like, you know, something that kind of came in with the edit, because sometimes we would just pull in something we would get from the internet, put it there as a placeholder, or Dave would eventually try to find the rights to it and get in the movie. But there's like lots of extra elements that are thrown in there, like, you know, moving interviews around to give things different context. And that's where it started to feel like a documentary, because you're like, okay, if we move this interview here and move this interview here and intercut it with this scene gives it power. And that's something you probably could never do in a traditional narrative. I think it's, you know, there's like a double-edged sword with working with friends. You know, friends can be, you know, sometimes you get too comfortable, and like I've worked with friends where sometimes where it's just like creative heads can butt, and that's no fun for everybody because it kind of affects the friendship. But, you know, with Justin and Aaron, like I'm the editor and they're the directors. So like, yeah, that relationship where it's movie their vision and I'm collaborating with them and executing that vision is always going to be there. But the friends part allows us to not only have have a blast with editing with each other, but B, allows you to kind of put away some of the political bullshit that would come with being like, hey, if something's not working, like as an editor, you're like, try to like massage how you would say it or something like that. But with friends, you can be like, hey guys, I don't think this part's working. Can we workshop this more? It's just kind of like, am I wrong? And it could be more casual with them about like things that aren't working. And it allows you to have like more of a rapport back and forth as director and editor. So there's pros and cons, but with those guys, it's definitely pro a lot of the time.
That's cool.